Take a good look, because this is the face of a man who may have just spent several hours analyzing his new favorite chess game of all time. Earlier this week, LC0 faced off against Stockfish in the Computer Chess Championships, and I knew when I saw it that it would probably go down as the best game I saw that week, either by human or one of our artificially intelligent overlords, but I didn't know just how much I would enjoy it until I began preparing for this video. I'm going to jump ahead and play the first two moves on the board to show you one of the main reasons that this move tugs at the heartstrings of this guy is because the Staunton Gambit is an approach I've been playing against the Dutch for many years, believing in the principled idea that the moment you can start prying open the light squares against the weak and most favorite target you could ever have in the Black Army, the better. But when Leela plays it, the love child of open source engineering and AlphaZero, if I'm allowed to say that, I just did, it really grabs everyone's attention. Now, as a reminder, any chess coach worth their salt will teach their students that even if you're not going to play for e4 in the Staunton Gambit, if you're going to play systems with knight f3 and g3, a la Vladimir Kramnik, who loves positions where you fiend counter the bishop and slowly engineer e4, whether you're going to go for systems with c4 and d5 early, the bottom line is that you have to pry open the light squares and create opportunities to get at the fearless leader of the Black Army in order to properly expose the Dutch. Black has played a move that has willingly created weak light squares, and it's your job to target them. But e4 is truly the most unapologetic way, to go for this idea. Black obviously has to capture it, right? Defending f5 is a non-starter, especially if you want to play a move like g6, as for those who like to keep track of quick fool's mates at home, something like this could be fun. But taking the pawn, clearly the best idea. Of course, that's what Stockfish does. And after the moves knight to c3 and knight f6, we get bishop to g5. Now, if you look up this position in the database, you may or may not find a game by Daniel Rensch versus Grigory Antel, a game that I lost at the Spice Cup many years ago in Lubbock, Texas. And I actually faced what is the most common approach for human players as Black with knight to c6, and after the move d5, knight to e5, rather than the more principled and traditional move queen e2, where White has a pretty decent score, I went for the idea queen to d4, which I don't think is that bad. I think that in the main game I had against Grigory, this fun h4 idea led to a pretty decent potential middle game endgame, and I probably could have gotten a better position right here if I hadn't played the move knight g to e2 as I did, and instead played the move 11 knight b5. So this is me making right with the demons of my own past. You can find that game in the database. But a game that will not be in the database is not a game that I lost, but a game that I won against none other than Grandmaster Gabriel Schwartzman in Reno many years ago, one of the youngest Grandmasters of all time. At some point, he was actually the record holder. But Schwartzman, in our blitz battle, blundered with the move d5, which is actually a common trick in the Staunton Gambit, so I had to show it. I simply captured on f6, played queen h5, you regain not just the pawn, but very quickly you end up winning more than a pawn. And in fact, I remembered that the moves went where he sacrificed f6 and tried to get an initiative on the e-file, but quickly after f3 was down 2 pawns and ultimately went on to lose. So again, these are a couple of my own games with the Staunton Gambit, and shows you the idea is very aggressive to open the center, try to look for tactics on the light squares, and this is what drives the principles of the Staunton Gambit, if you will. But Stockfish plays g6, not the move knight to c6 that Antel played, and not the move d5, not the blunder that Schwartzman played. After g6, we get the move bishop to c4. One principled idea is to play the move f3, and Stockfish actually played this move f3 against LC0 when the colors reversed in Season 13 over in our Chess.com Computer Chess Championships. You can check that game out in the analysis that I've included here, a link over to Peter Docker's news report. Spent a lot of time analyzing the game, so you can check out the notes if you're into that. But we're going to keep going with what happened in the main game. Bishop to c4. A very good move. Again, d5 is not possible because White can capture f6 first before then taking on d5 with the bishop. So instead, after bishop to g7, knight g to e2, Black played the move c6. Now, this is where things first start to get spicy, and we get to really get taken down the road by Leela of just uncompromising positional exposure of something your opponent made weak themselves, the light squares and everything that could potentially come with that to the Black king. C6 has a very obvious plan. You want to play D5, and if you achieve such goals, this is very, very obviously very good. A huge pawn chain, you're holding on to the E4 extra peshka. So white says no and plays D5. But this is a principled thing to do in any Dutch anyway. You never want black to be able to fully grip the light squares that they're trying to do with F5. And because they are also the key to you getting exposure to the weak squares, it makes sense to always strive to keep them open. So, after d5, Stockfish plays the move e6. I did analyze that c takes d5 is no good. After the move bishop takes d5, captures, and queen takes d5, we see all kinds of problems where the king can't castle. E6 is no bueno, as obviously your queen is hiding behind it, and natural moves might run into knight takes e4, where knight to d6 check is already a crushing threat, followed by f7 being a checkmate square because the e7 pawn is pinned. So that's just one idea of just highlighting some of the dangers that can happen to black if the light squares start opening quickly. So after the move e6, we get a very, very fun and original looking position with knight takes e4. And as I commented in my notes, whether computers are always improving on top-level humans when they play original ideas or they go for these less than popular opening lines, even if it's not always a technical improvement over top-level humans, I think sometimes it is. And I think some top-level elite players pay very close attention to what's going on in the Computer Chess Championship, seeing how Leela and Stockfish are playing some crazy positions. But even if it's not always an improvement, a position like this is an enjoyment to just watch. You're looking at a position that you will never see. It's a novel territory with so many pieces hanging, a million different ways to capture, a million different things. Excuse me there with the bad highlight. But it's just a super fun and original position to see and gave me joy analyzing it. After knight takes e4, black castled. Just to point out, e takes d5 right away would allow the move knight to d6 check, preventing black from castling, and white's going to get a very good attack. And the move c takes d5 shows a really fun line. After bishop takes d5, pawn takes d5, and a trade on f6, white actually is down a piece, but completely winning. A position where knight to d6 check, again followed by entry with the queen, is already very hard to stop. And even if you find a way to do so, things like knight to c6, knight d6 check, and king e7, white can immediately castle long, reinforce protection of the knight, and here comes the other tower of power joining the battle. So just a very, very dangerous position, not something that, that black is going to survive. Again, showing the light square exposure. So black castles, and after the move d6, we see Leela was going to ensure that when black played c6 a few moves ago, he was going to pay the price of bad queenside development. It's nice to see, of course, that it's just a principled thing you would tell any of your students to do, right? Your opponent plays a move like c6, which has an idea, but comes at a price of slowing down his own development, right? Taking away the natural c6 square. And you put that in your pocket and you make sure that all your moves are played with the goal of how can I try to increase my advantage in development? How can I take advantage of my opponent being behind a few moves? And that's really what, Leela does here with this move d6. Now, after queen a5 check, we get bishop to d2. The queen moves over to e5. We see a trade on f6, and it's right here, right now, that the whole world stops. And full disclosure, the CEO of Chess.com is a huge fanboy for computer chess. Practically has a picture of Leela, not the creepy one that some people use for their internet thumbnails, but a safe one above his office. Eric emailed me and Robert Hess this game right after it happened and said, "Have you guys seen this game? What in the world was f4? You can't play a move like that. You're talking about a position where you need to get your king castled. You have a pawn that's hanging on b2. And f4 is a positional no-no, just ask Ben Feingold. But it has the just uncompromising willpower that I know the way you take advantage of a Dutch, the king hiding behind the light squares, is you pry things open come hell or high water. So it's not just that Leela played the move f4. But after queen takes b2, rook b1, and castles, this particular position showed a plan that started blowing people's minds in live fashion. As we said, Eric sent me the game and has had a lot of people, at least on my team, talking about it ever since. We get the move king h1, but after queen c5, you remove the check, and Leela says, I didn't ever really care about the check. I got the king out of safety so that in this position, I could shock you with the move f5. A double exclam in my book. Gives up a free piece for no real clear forcing line of checkmate. But again, exposing that the light squares are the problem in the Dutch, that you created, Stockfish, when you moved your f-pawn on move 1. Maybe it was a mouse slip. And I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I may be down a piece in terms of how your mom sees chess, watching from afar up high. She's like, oh, it looks like my son has more pieces off the board. But a real chess player sees what's on the board and says what's on the board is not about the pieces off the board and how they look, but the fact that many pieces are not even playing yet. Sorry, chess moms, if I imitated you there, but that's just a joke that I was told when I was a kid and I passed it on unwillingly. Apparently, it was hidden deeply in my subconscious. Now it's out. Thank you. But f5 is saying, I'm going to open up the king side. The bishop is a small price to pay for the fact that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and don't forget about another rook who will quickly join the fight the moment he hops on the lift and takes the elevator over. After f5, black took the bishop, and fun stuff starts really right here. Let's see. So rook to f4, exclam. By the way, a move like rook to b4 I wanted to show that is not as good, because now when the queen moves and you take on g6, black can actually trade off one set of attackers, and on a move like this, you can't just keep bringing pieces over because you're hanging too many pieces to keep track of. So Stockfish may have hoped for an idea like that, but no, rook f4 was the move. And after the queen moves, we get f takes g6, h takes g6, and now rook to g4. A lot of lines are going to be analyzed and shown for you in the written analysis. Again, the link you can find below. And I'm going to try to show a lot of them here in the video because I think it really illustrates the attack. So let's say if you take g6, black wanted to trade. These are all moves that if you turn on an engine, I let Komodo think for a long time, wanted to make sure I believed in everything. You can also use Chess.com's analysis and see the eval bar take a very long time before it starts to creep up and understand the whites better. But if rook takes f4, you can now take with tempo, with the queen, and only then take on g6 on h7, followed by the queen entering, and variations like this, where the rook comes over to g3, and the queen, knight, and all kinds of stuff are coming in, is just completely losing for black, based mainly on the fact that he's just down 3 pieces. An abusive Russian chess coach would come along and just sweep those off the board and say something like, "You're not using them anyway. Why you want them?" and just throw them away. So that's one line that shows the danger of white's attack. H takes g6. Now we get to keep the pieces on the board. Again, as I said, this is why this variation of rook f4 first and not rook to b4, as much as that could have also been played with a tempo, is better. After the move rook to f6, if you really give the computers a long time to think, and in fact, for fun, kicks and giggles, I'm just going to turn on this eval bar here and let it show you how much it likes black. And if you turn them on, you'll find that Komodo, Stockfish, they all really like rook f2 for quite some time as the best move for black. I know because I went and had a bowl of oatmeal and let it think. But the more you give it time, the more you see the real depth of white's position. The eval bar is not going to come back, but I'm going to keep playing moves that make you think that black is still better. The eval bar and Stockfish are going to continue to think that black is better. This move is a fork, by the way, hitting both the rook on g6 and the knight on e2. But after the move queen to e4, we get the move rook takes g7, absolutely brilliant for Leela. King takes g7, knight to f4, double exclam, blowing my mind. The threats are queen to g4, along with bishop to c3 check. There's almost no way to deal with any of these mates besides take more material, right? Stockfish is still going to tell you that he likes black after a few moves. Bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, but here comes the shocker. The rook comes to b3, and there's no way to deal with the two-man gang of the queen and rook for a mating net without giving up your queen. Several more moves in this line show you that after checks, attacking the queen, we force the king back to g7 and win the lady. And now I finish the line out to mate just to show you that this position is not 50-50. The computer just doesn't understand it. A few more moves. The queen enters, and along with her trusty g-pawn, we have a completely winning position. There we go. The eval bar kicks in and understands that actually black is mated by force, and a variation like this shows the trick with queen h7 and queen f7 coming, and you just can't stop it. So that's one line. Again, I can't show every line. The main point of that was to show you that there is still, when it comes to Leela playing Stockfish anyway, a horizon effect that the best engines can have. The horizon effect is something in chess where a human being knows by intuition the sun will rise the next day, so it starts making decisions even when it's dark based on the fact that the sun is coming. And I'm giving a quick TLDR of the term. And so Leela's ability to understand the attack and the potential exposes a horizon effect, a limitation that the computer just doesn't know that black is just in huge trouble. Even after the move rook f6, as was played, it still thinks that black is doing well. But after knight c3, knight to e4, knight to g3, queen to h7. It still likes black at a pretty decent depth too, depth 20 right now I'm on. Here comes bishop to g5 with threats of rook h4. The main move in the game was the move c5, which gave back the queen, and at this point the computer started to understand that black was in trouble. But I wanted to analyze and prove to you that even a move like bishop e5, which the computers like, to try to keep the queen alive, you may indeed be saving the lady in variations like this, but you're not saving the game. After knight to e4, a move like rook f5 is the best according to the computer. Bishop h6, the queen moves, and then the very, very subtle move that I found super cute is just queen to e2. A simple move that not only puts pressure on the bishop, making a move like g4 even harder to stop as the rook gets overwhelmed trying to guard the minister and the square g5 for the knight, but also clears the square f1. I showed a very, very fun line to finish, b5, g4, the rook moves, here we go, we enter, the rook comes to f1, and as I said, the queen lives for black at the end of a variation like this. Unfortunately, the king does not. So very, very fun stuff. I like that line, just highlighting white's huge initiative. And as I've shown, some of the super critical lines here and the depth that Leela understood took a while for Stockfish to get it. Now that white played rook h4, I'll go ahead and turn the eval bar off, and we will simply complete the victory here that LC0 did in style. Queen takes, had to give herself up. Now black tries to develop, but it's too little too late, because here, even with a bunch of pieces for the queen, if you're doing the math, it's actually a rook, a bishop, and I think at least a pawn or two. We get the move knight to e5, queen to a4. I love the full board awareness, because this move is subtle, because the whole purpose of it, the whole reason you play it, is to make sure that black still can't get developed. Why does this move do that? Well, the only move to try to get developed would be to get this bishop out in c8. The d-pawn clearly is going nowhere, so the only option would be to push the b-pawn. Well, I put the queen on a4 precisely so that I could meet b6 with rook takes b6, and that's exactly what happened in the game. You can't take it because queen takes a8 would have been lights out. So knight to c4, the rook comes back, and I've still been preventing, by the way, the development of the bishop. So by taking d6, you are officially, for the first time, threatening to develop that bishop to the b7 square because the knight defends it. But after queen to g4, bishop to b7, you've traded one for another. You got developed, but your knight had to leave the e5 square, and therefore the protection of the g6 pawn behind. White continues to play good natural moves, freeing the back rank. Nothing like Leela telling us humans we've been right all along. Play prophylactic chess. Just free your king off the back rank when you don't know what else to do. Here comes a rook to the e7 square, which would have been a trade eliminating a defender of the g7 bishop. Right? That was the threat of rook e1, which is why black played this move, bishop to e4. But white trades and eliminates and heads to an endgame where the queen is much more powerful than the two rooks. Let me explain why. I'm not trying to undo or go through too quickly over the fact that this is still very good technique Leela's about to show. But from even a human perspective, you're looking at the most powerful piece on the board with weaknesses on all sides of the board, right? Whenever you have pawn weaknesses and an open king, these are the types of positions where the queen flexes her muscles in dominant fashion, because she can do things that pieces who have to coordinate together to have a fighting chance just can't do when the board is split, the center is open, there are weaknesses on all sides. And that's a quick sort of summary of why white is able to kind of dominate the next several moves of this position. A balance of using your king side advantages and knowing this king is weak, combined with keeping your eye on weaknesses on the queen side, are exactly how Leela takes advantage of this type of position. Moving the queen, again, all kinds of threats coming here. a7 hanging, things like bishop to d4 coming. So black tries to give a check for good measure. Rook to d6, queen c5. We're moving pieces. It doesn't matter at this point. White is going to simplify. And again, open kings and multiple passed pawns are where the queen will always do dirty things to a bunch of little pieces trying to coordinate against Her Majesty. And so we see a very, very nice kind of game here. Again, checking on e2, heading to a lost king upon ending. No bueno. You've got too much to deal with as black. So just a matter of time with Leela flexing targets on both sides, passed pawns on both sides. And that's exactly what she does here. This nice little game of tickle, by the way, always prevented black from being able to capture this d-pawn. Now she guards e5 in a more dominant fashion, checks the king, and just a move, she gets back to pushing her pawns. Here we go. Pawns and advancements happening on both sides of the board. The kind of thing that two rooks have nightmares about. a7, by the way, you could not capture it because queen to e7 would simply win the rook. Right there. Okay. so not possible. Rook a8. But the commitment you've made to this side of the board has left something else open, and that's when the other pawns get advancing. So, again, very, very just solid technique because she never even allows the rooks and king to coordinate. Not even totally necessary, but we'll give her the benefit of the doubt, that being Leela playing the kind of moves we can all aspire to be. And then this nice little finishing technique here. We won't call Leela a troll. It's an unnecessary capture to play queen takes rook. But we've talked about this forever. People have, they've been suspicious. They don't understand. Is there more than just open source engineering? Are they really just letting the neural net do her thing? If so, how does she become a natural troll when she doesn't need to be, right? It's crazy because any of these other moves are also completely winning. But she sees that she can give back the queen and flex the 2 pawns versus the rook just to have a little more fun. I always tried to teach her not to play with her food, but she wouldn't listen. And here we go. Leela just dominating queen versus rook. And eventually, as we play through the last moves, we'll just see how she takes care of business. In fact, here, again, this is again, how is this not a troll? How is this not a troll? I don't understand how these engineers get away with saying that they're not teaching her something. I don't know why she does it. People have explained, and I'm sure people will be listening in the comments, what it is about the algorithm and the neural net that has her want the game to continue longer than it needs to. But she just gives back the pawn to head to a queen versus rook, the kind of position that human beings have nightmares over, because these aren't supposed to be that easy to win. But for Leela, it's apparently just a walk in the park to go advance with the king and eventually get the Philidor position. By the way, good technique. The king should always lead the way and get as close as possible, while the queen should flex in central squares on diagonals and preventing the rook from ever separating, because that's when the checks open up and you eventually get squares like this where you're checking a king and attacking the rook on c1. These kind of things are why you want a queen centralized and the king getting as close as possible in a king and queen versus king and rook endgame. So you get a unintentional quick lesson there that Leela gave us because she's such a troll. Eventually, the rook has been separated, and she's going to... By the way, notice that great technique again. The queen guarded this square, which allowed the king to step forward without having to worry about a check from the rook. So she's just getting closer and closer to getting that forced check where you attack both king and rook. And the rest, as they say, is just a matter of technique. I'm going to click forward to get to our final moment, which is checkmate on the square called b2. So again, this has been one of the most enjoyable experiences that I never asked for during our COVID-19 crisis. Hope everyone is safe, healthy, and staying as sane as possible. If you happen to hear any screaming that I did during the video, those are my boys playing table tennis downstairs in the garage. They know a lot more about talking trash and yelling than they do about actually executing on a proper over-the-top forehand. But regardless of that, forgive it. I hope you're doing well. And as I said, the gift of focusing on some great chess that's been going on without any other events to distract and watching the Computer Chess Championships has been a joy. Shout out to Leela, who continues to do awesome things. Thanks for watching. Please give a like, please give a share, a subscribe if you're into it. Let people know how much you enjoy these analysis videos, and I shall see you around on Chess.com.